will give you some the most updated information on the current use of anthelmintic drugs in EU. I will speak a little bit about Heather and how Heather could work and what we're testing in the project. I will talk about the fungi, nematophagous fungi, so fungi that basically eat the worms, and again, what we're testing in the project. And then I will ask your help for future work on farmers group, focus group meetings and on farm validation trial for whoever may be interested. So the project has the very relaxing title, RELACS. It's a European Union project. And what we're looking there is to find ways to replace contentious inputs in organic farming systems. The project is wide. It covers plant production with copper and mineral oil and fertilizers, which are the contentious inputs in plant production. And in livestock production, the contentious inputs I'm sure you'll recognize are the anthelmintics, antibiotics, and synthetic vitamins. We have, it's a very large consortium. The European collaborators include organic certification bodies and universities. And from the UK, our partner is the Soil Association, of course. And the SRUC and Soil Association focus on anthelmintics and antibiotics. So you will very well know that gastrointestinal parasites are traditionally controlled with anthelmintic drugs. However, the organic farming cannot use them without heavy restriction. And also there is a big problem of anthelmintic resistance developing, not just within conventional, but also organic producers. So for these reasons, there is a big requirement to look into alternatives. Amongst the alternatives are grazing strategies, rotation and mixed grazing and stuff like that. Also nutrition, how to use bioactive forages and protein supplementation, and selective breeding of animals that are more resistant to parasites. These are all alternatives that are being investigated. I'll give you a little bit of the parasite life cycle, which I'm sure you will know about, but I thought it's a nice introduction to the subject. So this is a sheep, and this is a worm inside the sheep. And what the sheep does is excretes feces, and in the feces are the eggs of the worms. Now, the eggs are developing into first stage larvae, and then second stage larvae, and then third stage larvae, which are the infective larvae. And these are consumed by the sheep, and then inside the animal, they develop into adults. And this is what completes the full cycle, effectively. So you see that this life cycle, it kind of consists of two different, if you want, stages of the parasite. The stages of the parasite that are inside the animal, and these are the parasitic stages, and the stages of parasite that are outside the animal, which are the free-living stages. And what we are trying to do is to reduce the gastrointestinal nematode in sheep, and also to reduce the gastrointestinal nematode on pasture. So we are trying to target both of these different cycles of the parasites in the life cycle of the nematode. And to do that, within the project, we are taking a dual approach. So we're looking at bioactive grazing, bioactive forages, and as a model bioactive forage in this project, we're testing, if you want, Heather, to target the parasitic stages. And we're also aiming to use the biocontrol agent, the killer fungi, to target the free-living stages. And I will give much more detail on both of these different approaches. I just want to draw your attention here in the first image where Caroline is picking up Heather at Castle in the petlands, and this is the fungi that I will be talking about in a minute, a bit more. So the first question I would like to ask you, and as I said, if you don't mind using your chat box, just to give us a little bit of an idea. I know some of you have already completed a survey, and thank you for that. And for those who haven't, if they don't mind giving us a little bit of more background on whether you have access to Heather. And if you do have access to Heather, so if you're an uphill farm, what time of the year would the sheep graze on it, if you have noticed? And when they graze on it, if there is a requirement to supplement the animals when they graze heather, or grazing heather is just enough. So if you wouldn't mind just typing a couple of words on that, I would be most grateful. So I thought I'll give you a little bit of a hot from the press information on the current use of Anthelmintics in EU. The first task of the project, of the RELACS project, was to perform a survey. And the survey was to identify the current use of Anthelmintics in organic farms in Europe. To answer this survey, we asked the opinion of the organic experts rather than the farmers. And the reason we did that was to try and make it easy. As you may realize, it's easier to reach, the 5-10 experts, organic certification experts and advisors, than individual farmers. So that was the reason we opted for that. And we have done other surveys where the farmers' help was required. But on this occasion, it was organic experts of all livestock species. And the survey was translated and disseminated by partners throughout Europe. And the questions were just 2 questions. Just to keep it simple and try and get a feeling for how much Anthelmintics is currently used in Europe, in the organic farms, I repeat. So the questions were, the number of farmers that request Anthelmintics in their health plan. So how much of it is expected in terms of gastrointestinal nematode risk. And the second question is the number of farmers that require supplementary use of Anthelmintics. So the extra risk, basically, the extra threat, in addition to that expected. The survey was disseminated around Europe, and we got 139 responses. I remind you, it's the organic experts. So each one of these experts responsible for a large number of farms. And it covered 16 countries, and in total, 17,719 farms effectively was the coverage. And we'll just take a minute here just to show you a little bit what the outcome was. So this first graph shows the percentage of organic farmers, which you see on the y-axis, that request Anthelmintics in their health plan. So just to take the extremes to make things a little bit clear, a very small percentage of farmers, of organic farmers in Lithuania, require to have Anthelmintics in their health plan. That's one end of the spectrum. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, almost 100% of organic farmers request to have Anthelmintics in their health plan in Greece. Now, that doesn't say how many times they need to apply it. It just says that the majority of the Greek organic farmers that were surveyed through the organic experts require to have Anthelmintics in their plan.
Sorry to interrupt, Spiridoula. There's
yes,
some people saying that they can't see the graph.
They can't see the graph.
I'm not sure why that would be. People saying that they can't, so I'm not sure if that's a problem for everyone.
But some people can't see it?
Oh, okay, now they're saying it's come up and people can see it now. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. So I'll just repeat what I said before for the people who were a bit, who couldn't see the graph before. So this graph here, it shows the percentage of the organic farmers that have included the use of Anthelmintics in their health plan. And just to give an example of how it works, On the left-hand side, the one end of the spectrum is a very small percentage of farmers in Lithuania, for example, have included the use of Anthelmintics in their health plan. And on the other hand of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum, almost 100% of farmers of organic farmers in Greece have included the use of Anthelmintics in their health plan. Now, this doesn't say anything about how many times they want to use it or in which part of the flock they want to use it. It only says that basically most of the Greek farmers have it in their health plan, and on the contrary, most of the Lithuanian farmers, organic farmers, do not have it on their health plan. And you see the range is quite large between the different countries. Well, that gives an indication on how much Anthelmintic is requested in the health plans in the different countries. And this is the second part of the figure where the orange bars now show the supplementary requests for the use of Anthelmintics. Again, just to give specific examples, in Romania, for example, which is the third country from the right, almost 80% of the farmers ask for supplementary Anthelmintic use throughout the year. And in Belgium, here, for example, very small percentage ask for supplementary requests. And in Greece, none, probably because they've all included in their health plan. In Lithuania, still none, which may say something about that maybe parasites is not a big problem in Lithuania, or their standards are different from other countries. So just to sum up what the patterns of Anthelmintic use were shown to be through the survey, countries with high Anthelmintic requirement in their health plans also have high supplementation requirements, some of them anyway. So it's hard to predict disease, and what this shows is that we need to have flexibility for Anthelmintic use in organics around Europe, because clearly there is a very different requirement from country to another country. Some of the countries who had very low Anthelmintic request in the health plan also had low supplementary requests, such as Lithuania, if you remember. So some countries may have effective control strategies, and the rest of us could maybe learn something from how they're controlling worms. But this could also, as I said before, be related to different epidemiology of the parasite, geography, climate, and data limitations, etc. So this survey, and in combination with some data we were able to pick up from the literature, we were able to quantify that organic livestock receive, this is an assumption, again, this is based on assumptions, I should say, but based on some assumptions, we've made a calculation that each animal, each organic livestock receives 0.86 Anthelmintic treatments per year. And if we assume that the total heads of stock in EU is about 53 million, it's the total input of Anthelmintic per year in the EU is about 45.5 million doses of Anthelmintic. This is, as I said, based on assumptions, and it's just a rough calculation just to get a feeling about how much input goes into organic systems. So this is the second question I would really appreciate your input in, particularly if you're an organic farmer. If you're a conventional farmer, your input also is very valid. But the question is, if you are an organic farmer, is the 0.86 treatment per animal per year realistic? Is that what you give, more or less? Does this match your experience? And if I had asked you, how much do you think you're treating your animals with, would that be the figure you're giving me, or not? So if you have that possibility of giving me an answer, that would be most grateful. And actually, come to think about it, I will send out these questions after the presentation as well, if you don't have enough time to type in just now. So you can do that later if that's easier for you. So now I will speak to you a little bit about Heather. Heather, I'm sure you have all come across. It's a plant, if you want, that contains condensed tannins. So condensed tannins are plant secondary metabolites. These are metabolites, compounds, if you want, that are not primarily important for plant metabolism. And past research, particularly from goats, has shown that Heather may have the ability to reduce the parasite burden in animals. Past research as well, which was part of my PhD as well, has shown that condensed tannins, so the compounds that Heather is rich in, have antiparasitic activity. And the sheep that are grazing on hills have often been seen to chew on heather leaves. So with all this background, in this project, we decided to actually test to see whether heather can actually have this property. And before I go to that, and I did notice there were some people from maybe with some environment links or conservation. The third question for you, and actually for all of you, is whether you think sheep grazing on heather may be acceptable, and whether you think that it could actually be seen having a negative impact on the environment, and whether there are certain conditions under which that may be acceptable or not. So I would really like your views on that. And as I said, if it's not possible to type now, the questions will come out after the presentation as well. So to test the antiparasitic activity of heather, we started by trying some things in the lab, which is in vitro experiments, basically. And the first things we tried was to test whether heather has the ability to stop the eggs, the parasite eggs, from hatching, and also whether it has the ability to stop the infective larvae from moving. And any effect on this obviously would have an impact on infectivity. And within the project, we wanted to do a comparative analysis. So we tested the efficacy of different countries. So Scotland, Switzerland, Norway, Germany, and Spain, which are partners in our project. And we also tested 2 different seasons, so looking at seasonal variation, spring and winter. 2 different parasite species, the abomasal Teladorsagia and the intestinal Trichostrongylus. And for Spain in particular, 2 different heather species, Caluna and Erica, and the various doses of heather. So we tested heather at different levels. So just to briefly go through what we found in the lab, which is the first step. So this is on the x-axis, the different countries. So UK, Spain, Switzerland, Germany, and Norway. And on the y-axis is the different efficacy of the extracts. And we found that the heather extract from the UK and Spain were the best at reducing the egg hatching ability of the parasites. And the heather extract from Norway has the least efficacy. But having said that, it's still having quite a decent anthelmintic activity, just less than the rest, but still some efficacy. And when we tested the effects on the different parasite species, we saw that the efficacy is higher against the abomasal worm compared to the intestinal worm. But again, even the intestinal worm showed some susceptibility in heather. And there was a seasonal effect with, this is the heather from the winter, and this is the heather from the spring. And you see there is variation. The way this is the LD50. So the LD50 is the amount of extract required to effectively cause 50% of the effect. So in this case, it's 50% of the hatching. So the lower this amount is, the more active the heather is. And you see, so the lower values are in spring. So in general, spring heather is more active against parasites compared to the winter one. So we were able to see seasonal variation as well. So the next steps are to finish the in vitro testing. And I should say that all the in vitro work is done by our PhD student, Fran Shepard. And the next step is that she finishes the larval motility assay, so to check whether there was an effect of heather on the way the larvae move, and with impact on their infectivity, effectively. And then COVID-19 allowing us, we're hoping to do an animal trial to test whether the effects that we see in the lab are actually replicated also when sheep are feeding on heather. So that's the next steps for heather. And I will speak a little bit about the fungi, which from the little survey we did before, it looks like not many people have heard about it. So the Latin name of the fungus is Datingtonia flagrans. And I will play a little video, which I believe you cannot hear the sound. So I will be talking over the video, but somebody give me a shout if that doesn't work, please. So the fungus called it's nematophagus. Sorry, I need to stop. So the fungus is basically eating the worms. It's creating a net, and every time it's coming into contact with the worms, it's basically killing the worms. The spores are fed to the animals and they are ingested. It goes through their digestive system, still as a spore, and then it's delivered into the manure. And there is where the fungus is coming in contact with the larvae, and effectively it's being killed. The efficacy of the fungus has been tested in many different systems and in many different animals, and it's working really well with the sheep feces. Sorry, I need to try and get to the next one there. And it's working really well with the cattle feces. So it can reduce pasture contamination by almost 70%. I should say that the efficacy depends largely on the moisture in the fecal pellet. Spores are available commercially in some countries. I don't think they're available in the UK, but sorry, there is a company in Australia that could make the spores available in the UK, but there's no company in the UK that sells those. And what we're testing in the RELACS is whether the use of fungi in combination with the heather can improve parasite control and can optimize efficacy of both of these being used separately. So if heather and the fungi together can improve parasite control. So I would also like to hear, I've heard from some of you that you haven't heard of the fungus before, but if I could have some more views of people who have heard about it, but also from all of you, whether you would be willing to give that a go. I mean, this is a naturally occurring fungi. It's not anything, it's not anything sinister. It's just out there. It's available. We just feed it to the animal in larger concentrations to make sure there is an effect on parasites. So your opinion on whether this may be something that you would be willing to try would be appreciated. So in addition to what we're doing on the research front, the project is aiming to collaborate as much as possible with stakeholders, and that includes farmers. So we're planning to hold farmer focus groups meetings in the next few months. The focus group meetings would be consisting of farmers who are either uphill and they have access to heather, or they don't have to be uphill, but they may be willing to use the fungi as a little experiment on their farm. So if you are a farmer that are interested in using alternatives, any of these alternatives, uh, if you have thought about it and you have come up with any problems with their use, or if you're willing to learn a little bit more about whether that may be something that could be relevant for your conditions, or if you thought about using them but you think it's going to be too expensive, then we want to hear from you. The farmer focus groups are smaller groups of farms. So we now have, I don't know, 50, 60 people, but the focus groups are going to be from 5 or 6 people. So the discussion is going to be more in depth. And we're able to go into the more specific details on how to take this forward, because the idea is to try and use the alternatives effectively to reduce the use of anthelmintics. So the farmer focus groups is a very important activity for the project, and I hope some of you will be willing to participate in those. So what we want to do in these groups is discuss all the costs and the benefits of the alternatives. I say again that the focus is going to be on heather and the use of fungi, but other alternatives will also be considered in the larger scheme of things, maybe in combination with those or separately. But so although the focus is going to be heather and fungi, other alternatives will also be considered. We will also be discussing the socioeconomic and environmental impacts. I did hint through my presentation on certain aspects of this, and we will be hoping to go more into understanding what the constraints may be from people not using them so much yet. And we will also try to come up with strategies and maybe approaches to optimize their use. As I have no doubt you will know better than me, the conditions of different farms are so different. So what's right from farmer one, it's not going to be right for farmer two. So we will try and find a way of taking this into consideration when we're thinking of alternatives. And then from the focus groups, we hope to identify 1 or 2 farmers that may be able to help us with small on-farm trials. We have done some of this in previous projects, and we have some experience on how to do that. So what we're hoping to do is willing farmers commit into managing a part of their flock using either heather, if they have this possibility, or fungi for parasite control. And then for the rest, manage their flock in their traditional management, whatever it is they normally do. So just take a small part of the flock, and use it with alternatives. And then do some measurements. For example, the weight gain, or look at finishing times, the number of anthelmintic drenches they use for each of the different groups, or maybe do some fecal accounts. I mean, we are going to support with that as much as we can. So we will be there to help with all these measurements. But this is something that we can discuss later on. It's just to give you an idea about what we're hoping to get your participation in that. So the focus group meeting is one thing where quite small groups of farmers are discussing a bit more in detail the alternatives. And then the farm validation is again 1 or 2 farmers. We don't need a lot to be willing to try some things on the farm. So that is my presentation for today. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and let me see how I'm going to do that now. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have, either now or later or whenever you want.
Spiridoula, there was some interesting questions coming up on the feed, so perhaps I can start with those.
Yes.
To start, first of all, with the fungi, as we've just finished with that, there was a lot of people saying that they were interested in trying it, but there were some questions about the potential for ecological clashes with other soil-dwelling organisms, and if there would be any costs to the sheep, for even if they weren't infected, and also what would the costs to using this product look like and the frequency of application.
So these are awesome questions, and these are the kind of questions I can give you some response in relation to those, but a lot of these are things that would need to be discussed in the focus group. So as far as research goes, there is absolutely no negative effects on the sheep. So nothing happens on the sheep. They just this is just used to passage the spores on the feces, and people have tried to just spread the spores on the feces after, without the sheep having to eat it, so on pasture, but for some reason this did not result in good effects. So the spores have to be eaten by the sheep and excreted in the feces as it goes. So, but there is absolutely no impact on the sheep. There is also absolutely no impact on the environment, because these are specific. These fungi are specific for parasitic nematodes. They have no impact on free-living nematodes or soil nematodes or anything like that. So, what were the other questions, Caroline, on that? Oh, the cost. So the cost. For the people who would be willing to try on farm during the project, we would take the cost for that. So there wouldn't be cost for you during the project. Now for after the project, I'm not quite sure I can answer the question. But there is a product in Australia called BioWarma, which is basically commercially available spores, and we could have a look. I don't know, I should have probably checked it myself, so I'm not able to give you information about the cost now.
We can include it in the follow-up.
Yeah.
And there's some questions coming in about whether they need to be fed continuously.
So so the current there is a lot of groundwork that has happened already, and it's the optimum is 4 or 5 days. In order for them to work in a certain time period, it's 4 or 5 days. They reach enough concentration. They don't have to be fed afterwards for a while, and then when you want to do something again for parasite control, feed them again. So blocks is the suggested the suggestion, blocks of 4 or 5 days, and then again later on.
Is there a difference in the specificity against different gastrointestinal nematodes, and can it also be used in other ruminant species, cattle?
Yes, so it can be used in cattle, and there is it has been tested against all the sheep gastrointestinal nematodes, and I believe some of the cattle as well. And it is there is no evidence for any variation in efficacy in the main gastrointestinal nematodes of sheep anyway.
And it doesn't have any impact on fluke? No.
It doesn't have any impact on fluke, I'm afraid. And I don't even know if heather has an impact of fluke. This is something it just hasn't been tested. I know fluke is a big issue.
Okay. There's some comments coming in about access, about people that have tried to get in touch with BioWarma. And they don't seem to have had much of a response. Yeah.
So the company we're going to be doing our work during the project is from Switzerland. It's a small company and it's only now starting. So if everything goes as we hope it's going to go, they're hoping to become bigger and be able to make this available in Europe. I have heard from others that biowarma is not always easy to reach. I'm not sure why. But all I can say is that if there is some people that are interested in trying on their farm during the project, the fungi, we can help with that, and then we'll see what happens basically.
And on horses, would it also be okay, given they're not ruminants? No cost to the horse.
There is no cost, certainly no cost, because you can imagine it's like nothing happens. It's only the means that delivers the spores. So there's absolutely no negative effect on any of the animals that it's tested on. Yeah.
Right. Some of the questions that came up about the heather, there was an interesting point about a potential cost to the heather is that the sheep may be exposed to more ticks. Is that, yeah, is that?
Yeah. So I assume that's this is true, but yes, it's possible, but it is something that, I mean, if you are a hill farm and you are having heather and sheep are there anyway, they will be exposed to the ticks. But I guess, yeah. But even ticks are even on grass, so I'm not sure if it's going to be any worse. I don't know much about that. I'm afraid. But whoever asked the question, maybe they have a better insights in that. I'll be interested to hear if they're willing to share.
Some people were also curious about the potential for plants like heather to be harvested and used as supplements. I suppose they don't have access to these plants.
Yes, I mean, this is great point, and this is something we're looking in it as well. And remember, heather is used in this as a model plant. What heather is able to do, other plants are able to do, maybe in different parts of the country or different heights in terms of, if you're a lowland and not an uphill farm and stuff like that. So this is certainly an option. I mean, before COVID-19, we were hoping to be able to do that. So harvest heather and use it create a pellet and use it as a supplement. I'm afraid I don't think we'll be able to do that now, but it's certainly an idea that's worth pursuing.
There was a specific question on if there's been any comparisons to San Juan, which the person had heard had been quite effective, and how does that compare against heather?
So San Juan as well as heather, it's the same compounds they're rich in, so that's condensed tannins. And we haven't done the analysis of heather yet, but Fran is going to analyze all the different heathers from the different countries to see what the composition is effectively. So once we know the composition of the compounds in heather, we will be able to compare it with San Juan. But as a general thing, it's the same kind of compounds that both plants are rich in. But at this stage, we don't know any more detail about it.
It's okay. We'll jump back to the fungi. Some more questions have come in. And it's specificity again. Does it include Homunculus and Nematodiris? And would a good moment be to include it at the periparturient rise?
So the periparturient rise is a period that worms are a big problem. So yes, is the answer. That would be, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if it has been tested against periparturient use, but knowing the theory behind it, periparturient animals are having problems with worms, and it would be a period to try. And if any of the farmers would be willing to try in periparturient animals, I'm really interested. Let me know. So certainly. So specificity, Homunculus is yes, because our collaborators in Switzerland, they're constantly using it against Homunculus. But as I said, Teladorsagia and trikes are also susceptible. I'm not sure about Nematodiris. I will have to check, and I'll get back to you. If we can keep a note of that, and then I'll get back to you.
Chickens, can it be used on poultry? Excuse me. The fungi.
I don't know is the answer to that. I believe I seem to believe biowarma is also for chickens, but I don't hold me responsible for that answer. I will check and I'll get back to you. I'm not sure about chickens.
Okay. There are a few more specific questions coming in, so if we have missed any, I'm sure we can put up a list to try and answer them after this.
Yes, yes. So yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah.
I think this covers most of the questions. Give me a moment.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, if heather interrupts the parasitic reproduction, does this mean that areas where sheep graze on heather, such as common grazing, are mainly free of parasitic contamination?
In theory, that would be absolutely right. Now, we're not, yes, in theory, but I don't really know the epidemiology of parasite in heatherland. It would be a very interesting project. But in theory, if it works as well in the animal as we have found in the lab, because remember, so far we have just tested it in petri dishes. But if it works as well as there in the animal, then it may very well have an impact. And remember, it is generally known that hill sheep are a bit more robust in terms of they're less susceptible in parasites compared to, of course, that to other sheep. This could be the outcome of a large number of factors, but we don't know if what they're grazing and what they're eating may have an impact on that as well. So it's just a very interesting observation, and it could make a project on itself, basically.
Has there been any research done elsewhere investing impacts on rumen microbiome, so affecting feed efficiency, live weight gains, and methanogenesis? I'm not sure if that's specific to the fungi or to the heather. But
okay. So say the question again, Caroline.
Has there been any research investing the impacts on the rumen microbiome?
The impacts of heather, I assume.
They didn't specify, so yeah.
So I assume, do you mean the impact of heather or the impact of condensed tannins? And there is a lot of work that is currently being done on the impact of condensed tannins on methane emissions, actually on rumen microbiome, and as a consequence on methane emission. But this is not something we have been looking at it at all, although obviously there will be interactions between rumen bacteria and parasitic life stages in the rumen, I assume. So something of interest as well, but I can't give you any specific comments on that.
So some people commenting on the grazing of sheep of heather, saying that while they do graze it, it's minimal compared to some of the other pastures.
Yes, yes. We will need to find out a little bit more about grazing patterns, and if we do find, because what we're hoping to do in our animal study, whenever that's allowed to take place, is to cut and carry heather and feed it to animals in addition to some other feed. What we're hoping to do, as I said, is to pellet it and make it a bit more palatable and see what's the impact of that. But being unable to do that at this stage, we will be able to say how much they're eating. Our collaborators in Switzerland, that they did a study last summer, I believe they were feeding, I mean, Fran can get me right here, but I believe they're feeding at about 250 grams a day. And the animals were happy eating. Well, I'm not sure if they were happy, but they were eating about 250 grams a day of heather, which when it was offered as cut and carry. So all this information will have to be, all these questions will have to be answered before we can make specific recommendation. It's just an area that it gains a lot of interest. And as I said, heather is the model plant. There are other plants with similar properties that could be investigated.
Some people have been asking specifically about if you know anything about the effects of willow.
I know what the literature says. Willow is again another plant that, another extract. Willow extract has condensed tannins, same way as heather when we're talking about, and same point. So it belongs in this category. So it has shown to have anti-parasitic properties, but I haven't worked with willow before. So yes, based on the literature, it is active against worms. I don't know if anybody here had experience in using willow for parasite control.
Some of the other questions are much more specific to the application and how long the fungi, for example, would be active. But I assume a lot of this would be addressed in follow-up.
Exactly, and also it will depend on the weather quite a lot. So if there's a lot of rain and the fecal pellets disintegrates, the activity is going to be lasting less. Again, if it's too dry and the fecal pellets dries out, again, it may have an impact. So the thing with how long will the activity persist, it will depend a lot on the weather as well.
There's some interesting comments coming in about the palatability of different forages, and the sheep will often, based on what they need, graze differently.
This is so interesting because obviously, we think, or not we, but people who don't know about sheep think that sheep are really stupid, but they're not. They're changing their foraging patterns depending on what they need, and I totally agree that this is happening. So it's interesting. Yeah.
I think we've covered most of them. I'm having some difficulty scrolling down, so excuse me for the delay.
That's all right.
It isn't practical to feed free-ranging hill sheep with loose feed in troughs. Most are fed either feed blocks or U-rolls. How could fungi be added to the diet?
That's a good question. We'll need to think about that. So maybe you are offering yourself to be part of the focus group. That would be really awesome.
Someone has suggested covering them with molasses.
Yeah, so molasses is what we're thinking as well, and just to improve palatability, definitely an option.
I saw Joanne smiling when you were offering her to be part of the group.
Yes.
So I'm gonna say.
Just keep notes, Anna, please.
I think that's covered the majority. Again, a lot of it is much more specific questions about the application of fungi, but we can follow up with those.
Yes, yeah.
So just as a note, I'm not sure if there's more questions that you would like to answer. We're almost on the time, so I would say we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and then we need to wrap up.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's possible to identify another 1 or 2 questions, Caroline, from the ones already asked, it's fine. Otherwise, if anybody has a burning question based on what I just said, please raise your hand, and I'm happy to answer that.
No burning questions at the moment, apparently.
Okay, that's fine.
So I think that's gonna.
Oh, sorry, one last question come in that might wrap things up nicely. Are SRUC doing any research on diverse spores? And coccidiosis is also a problem. Is there any solutions recommended as alternatives? And when does the project conclude? Sorry, there's plenty coming in now.
Sorry, so what was the first part of the question, Caroline?
Is SRUC doing any research on diverse swords?
On diverse swords, yeah, I'm sure they do, but I don't know. This is probably going to be something for me to follow up. Coccidiosis, it's a problem. We haven't looked at any alternatives to coccidia yet, anyway. but I agree, it's a big issue, and yeah, for young lambs is a problem. And then what was the last one?
When does our project conclude?
So the project concludes in 2022. And we're hoping to get some farmers involved with the focus groups in the next few months. And we are hoping for 1 or 2 on-farm demonstrations next summer. COVID-19 allowing everything. Of course, there's this big issue now. But that's the current timeline. Excuse me.
Well, thank you everyone so much. Before we finish, I would like to highlight the fact that, as Spiridoula and Caroline is saying, we would like to run a couple of focus groups and a couple of trials. So in the follow-up email, we will also ask you if you would be interested in being part of either of them. We will be coordinating them, so it'll probably take a shape not unlike this one, just with fewer people and more in depth. So if you're interested, please let us know responding to the follow-up email. Again, not the instructions, but how it's going to work. All the information is going to be available in that follow-up email, so you shouldn't have any problems. We also have a recording of all the questions. So if there's any questions that have not been answered, or there's anything that you think about afterwards, do send them. We'll be happy to address them either in the follow-up email or directly, depending on your preference. And I'm not sure if Spiridoula or Caroline, you would like to say something to close the discussion, but well, I think that it's been really interesting, so we really appreciate it.
Well, I hope everybody found it useful, and I would like to thank you so much for being so interested and having so many questions. And I'm really sorry I couldn't meet you, face to face. It would have been great. Hopefully soon. But please, get in touch if you have any additional questions, or if Anna and I and Caroline will follow up on questions we haven't been able to answer just now. And I will be looking forward to chatting to some of you in a little bit more depth in the focus groups and the on-farm demonstrations. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you found it useful.